Tonight, I invite you to journey with me to the untamed wilderness of Ezo, in a time long forgotten by history, in Japan, where the winds howl through the valleys of Mount Yōtei, carrying with them whispers of lost honor, vengeance, and a rising legend. This is the tale of Atsu, a fallen samurai, a rōnin who has shed her past to become the ghost of Mount Yōtei. Her journey unfolds across the wild and untamed lands surrounding Mount Yōtei, a majestic peak nestled in the heart of Ezo, what we know today as Hokkaido, a land without law, where survival depends on strength and cunning. Ezo harbors many dangers, but none as formidable as the warrior whose heart battles between justice and revenge. In a world where the line between good and evil blurs, swords will clash, lives will be lost, and destinies will intertwine in ways no one could foresee. Atsu's journey is one of redemption, where the tranquil beauty of Ezo's landscapes hides the lurking shadows of cruelty and betrayal. But before we begin, I want you, my dear listener, to comment down below where you're from and what time it currently is. Now settle in, let the cold winds of Ezo's mountains envelop you, and prepare to follow the path of the ghost, as we descend into a story where legends are born and the future is written by the blade. The frigid winds howled as they swept down the slopes of Mount Yōtei, carrying with them the scent of pine and the bitter taste of snow. The towering peak stood like a guardian over the land of Ezo, its presence both majestic and foreboding. This was a place beyond the reach of the shogun's rule, a place of ancient spirits, wild forests, and untamed fields of frost. For centuries, the land had belonged not to men, but to the mountains, rivers, and the spirits that roamed them freely. But now, in the year 1603, Ezo was a land of uncertainty and fear. The once peaceful villages that dotted the landscape had become little more than husks, haunted by the ghosts of anarchy and bloodshed. Bandits roamed the roads like wolves, and warlords, seeking power and dominion, fought over the shattered remains of a place they did not understand. The people, caught between blades and tyranny, had no one to turn to, no protector to guard their fragile lives. No one, that is, until whispers began to spread of a figure that moved through the night, a shadow that left terror and retribution in its wake. The villagers spoke of her in hushed voices, a woman, clad in dark armor, her face hidden behind the mask of a demon. She moved like a wraith, striking down the cruel and the unjust with ruthless efficiency. They called her Onryo no Kage, the vengeful shadow. To others, she was known simply as Yurei, the ghost. Her real name, however, was Atsu, a name she had once cherished, now discarded like a broken sword. Atsu was a rōnin, a samurai without a master, wandering the land in search of something that had been stolen from her, her honor, her purpose, and the very identity that had defined her since birth. Her clan had fallen long ago, betrayed and butchered by a powerful warlord. She alone had survived, but survival had come with a price, the burden of guilt and the hunger for vengeance. Now, beneath the shadow of Mount Yōtei, Atsu stood at the edge of a village that lay nestled between rolling hills and thick forests. It was a small place, its people few and its homes humble. Yet even here, where the world seemed to shrink to the size of a single rice field, cruelty had found a way to seep in. The faint glow of torches and the shouts of men echoed through the still night air, a reminder that peace was as fleeting as the morning mist. Atsu's eyes, dark and unyielding, scanned the scene below. A group of bandits, filthy and arrogant, had gathered at the center of the village, their laughter carrying a weight of menace. A sob broke the quiet, and Atsu's gaze narrowed. A young woman, clutching her child, was being dragged forward by one of the brutes. The villagers watched, silent and afraid, their fear a suffocating presence that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. The ghost had seen enough. With a steady breath, she reached for the blade at her side, the katana that had seen her through countless battles. She would strike tonight, like a sudden storm. And when dawn came, the village would remember that even in a land of despair, there existed those who fought not for power, but for the honor that had been lost. For the justice denied to the weak. The vengeful shadow moved, a whisper in the wind. Snow crunched beneath Atsu's feet as she descended into the heart of the village, each step measured, each movement as fluid as the wind that wove through the frozen branches above. The bandits hadn't noticed her yet, too engrossed in their terrorizing to sense the shift in the air, the scent of steel and death approaching. The mother, still clutching her child, pleaded for mercy, but her voice was a broken, tremulous whisper that seemed to vanish into the night. One of the bandits, a hulking brute with a scarred face and blood-stained armor, jerked her forward, causing the child to cry out. "Quiet, woman!" he snarled, his grip tightening on her arm. "This village belongs to us now. You all do. Resist, and your child will be the first to suffer." The bandits roared with laughter, their mockery a twisted symphony of cruelty. But in that moment, amidst the noise and fear, a new sound rang out, a soft whoosh, the whisper of silk slicing through air. The bandit's eyes widened, his laughter caught in his throat, and he stumbled back, staring at the thin line of red that had appeared across his chest. Silence fell as he crumpled to the ground, the laughter dying as quickly as it had started. The other bandits froze, eyes darting about in confusion and panic. The scarred brute twitched once and lay still, his blood staining the snow like spilled ink. Slowly, one by one, the men turned to face the source of the strike. Atsu stood alone, framed against the backdrop of Mount Yōtei's towering presence. Her figure was draped in a dark, tattered haori, the loose fabric fluttering gently in the wind. Her katana, unsheathed and gleaming under the moon's pale light, pointed downward, a single drop of blood sliding down its edge before melting into the snow. "You dare interfere?" one of the bandits barked, his voice trembling as he raised his sword. He took a step forward, but Atsu's gaze locked onto him, a look as cold and sharp as her blade. "I am Yurei," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of countless lost souls. "The ghost of Mount Yōtei. And your cruelty ends tonight." Panic rippled through the group like a wave. They'd all heard the rumors, the tales of a ghost that stalked the lands, hunting those who preyed on the weak. Some scoffed at the stories, calling them mere legends, but the sight before them told a different story. The bandits shifted uneasily, their bravado crumbling. "Kill her!" their leader shouted, his voice breaking the spell of fear. "She's just one woman!" But in the time it took for him to finish his command, Atsu had already moved. She dashed forward, a blur of motion, her blade singing through the air. The first bandit swung wildly, but his blow met only empty space. He barely had time to register the movement before the cold kiss of steel sliced through his throat. He dropped, gurgling, the life fading from his eyes, A second bandit lunged at Atsu's side, but she pivoted smoothly, her katana slashing upward in a fluid arc. The man's sword shattered, and he fell back, clutching his severed arm. Before he could scream, Atsu spun, the flat of her blade striking his temple, sending him sprawling into unconsciousness. One after another, the bandits fell. Atsu's strikes were precise and unrelenting, each swing of her blade guided by the relentless drive to end their reign of terror. She moved with the grace of a predator and the fury of a storm, her form merging seamlessly with the shadows. Within moments, only their leader remained, his hands trembling as he raised his sword in a futile attempt to defend himself. Blood smeared his face, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Atsu paused, her blade hovering near his chest. "Who sent you here?" she demanded, her voice low and dangerous. The man shook his head, stumbling back. "And no one. We're just..." Atsu's blade flickered, the tip drawing a thin line of blood on his cheek. He whimpered, dropping his sword. "Wait. It's Shoujo. The warlord Shoujo ordered us to raid the villages. He's building an army, conquering Ezo bit by bit. The words were cut off as Atsu's sword flashed once more. The man slumped to the ground, eyes wide and lifeless. A moment of stillness followed, the only sound the soft rustle of wine through the pines. Atsu stood over him, the fire of battle slowly dimming in her eyes. "Shoujo," she murmured, tasting the name like a bitter poison. She knew of him, the warlord who had recently emerged, carving a bloody path through the north. He was ruthless and ambitious, his men known for their cruelty. And if he continued unchecked, the land of Ezo would soon fall completely under his control. The villagers began to emerge from their homes, their faces pale and haunted. The mother who had been threatened earlier stepped forward, her child still clinging to her side. "Thank you," she whispered, bowing deeply. "We have nothing to offer you, but you saved us." Atsu sheathed her katana, her gaze drifting to the bodies strewn across the snow. "Your thanks are not needed," she replied, her voice soft yet distant. "But if you wish to repay me, remember this: the ghost fights for you, for all of you. But I am not your savior." She turned, the villagers watching in silence as she walked away, her figure disappearing into the shadows beyond the village's edge. For Atsu, there was no rest, no respite. Only the long road ahead, and the ever-present winds of her past, pushing her forward. Tonight, another village had been saved, but the true battle still loomed, waiting beyond the snowy hills and darkened forests. And the ghost of Mount Yōtei would be ready. The icy plains of Ezo stretched endlessly before Atsu, a sea of white that shimmered under the harsh light of the winter sun. Her breath came out in visible puffs as she trudged through the snow, each step a reminder of the relentless struggle she had chosen to endure. The path she walked was treacherous, not only because of the biting cold and the unforgiving terrain, but because it led her deeper into enemy territory, a land controlled by the warlord Shoujo. The name echoed in her mind, stirring memories of blood and fire. Shoujo, the man whose ambition and cruelty had razed villages to the ground, enslaving the people of Ezo for his own gain. He had risen to power swiftly, cutting through opposition like a scythe through wheat. And now, he sought to claim all of Ezo for himself, stamping out anyone who dared defy him. Atsu's gloved fingers tightened around the hilt of her katana, the leather creaking softly. The more she learned about Shoujo, the more he reminded her of another warlord, one who had annihilated her clan, leaving her to wander the world as a rōnin. She felt the old rage stirring within her, a dark flame that threatened to consume her every time she let her thoughts linger too long on the past. But she couldn't afford to be consumed now. There was work to be done. After leaving the village behind, Atsu had spent weeks tracking Shoujo's forces, moving silently through forests and mountain passes, gathering information from reluctant informants and the whispers of those who had witnessed his brutality firsthand. Now, she found herself standing at the edge of one of Shoujo's fortresses, a sprawling complex of wooden walls and stone towers, nestled within a dense pine forest. The fortress was heavily guarded. Dozens of soldiers patrolled its perimeter, their armor glinting in the light of the setting sun. Atsu's eyes narrowed as she surveyed the scene from her vantage point on a nearby hill. She had come alone, knowing that no one would dare follow her on such a dangerous mission. The goal was simple: infiltrate the fortress, gather intelligence, and if possible, weaken Shoujo's hold on the region. A plan formed in her mind, each step calculated and precise. Under the cover of night, she would slip through the outer defenses, using the shadows and the natural cover of the forest to her advantage. Once inside, she would find Shoujo's officers, men who carried out his orders with sadistic glee, and leave a message that the ghost was watching. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the snow. Atsu waited, her breath slowing, her pulse steadying. She had become the wind itself, unseen, unheard. And when the first stars began to twinkle in the sky, she moved. The guards at the fortress gate stood at their posts, their expressions weary and their breaths forming clouds of mist in the cold air. One yawned, shifting from foot to foot in a futile attempt to stay warm. He turned to his companion, grumbling under his breath. "I don't see why we have to keep watch every night like this," he muttered. "Who'd be foolish enough to attack a place like this?" The other guard, a grizzled veteran with a scar across his nose, snorted. "Foolish or not, orders are orders. Shoujo has been on edge lately. Ever since those rumors started spreading." "Rumors? You mean about the ghost?" The younger guard laughed, though the sound was strained. "I thought she was just some story to scare children." "Maybe she is," the veteran replied, his gaze sweeping the darkness beyond the gate. "But I've seen stranger things in my time, and I'd rather not be the one to find out the hard way." Their conversation was cut short by a faint rustling sound. The younger guard turned, squinting into the gloom. "Did you hear that?" The veteran frowned, his hand drifting to the hilt of his sword. "Probably just the wind. Keep your eyes." A shadow moved, and the veteran's words turned into a gurgling gasp as a flash of silver cut through the night. Blood sprayed across the snow, and the young guard stumbled back, his eyes wide with horror. Before he could cry out, a dark figure stepped forward, a blade gleaming in the starlight. "Wha?" was all he managed before the blade struck, swift and merciless. Atsu pulled the sword free, letting the guard's body crumple to the ground. She glanced around quickly, ensuring no one else had noticed. The night was still, the only sound the soft rustle of the wind through the trees. With practiced ease, she dragged the bodies into the shadows, hiding them from view. Then, she slipped through the gate and into the fortress. The inner courtyard was a maze of wooden buildings and narrow alleyways, lit by flickering torches that cast long, wavering shadows. Atsu moved silently, her eyes scanning for any sign of movement. Soldiers were stationed at key points, but their patrols were irregular, leaving gaps in their coverage. She slipped past them with ease, blending into the shadows like a wraith. Her destination was the main hall, where she had learned that Shoujo's officers gathered to discuss their strategies and plan their conquests. If she could disrupt their operations, sow fear and confusion among their ranks, it would slow Shoujo's advance and buy the people of Ezo time. The door to the hall was guarded by 2 men, their eyes heavy-lidded with fatigue. Atsu crept closer, her hand resting on the hilt of her tanto, the shorter blade gleaming faintly in the torchlight. With a swift, fluid motion, she struck, the blade sliding between the ribs of the first guard, silencing him before he could react. The second guard barely had time to draw his sword before Atsu's katana cleaved through his throat. The doors swung open soundlessly as Atsu stepped inside. The hall was dimly lit, the smell of smoke and sweat hanging heavy in the air. A group of men sat around the low table, their voices low and tense. Maps and scrolls were scattered before them, marked with Shoujo's insignia. "Doubt we can't keep losing men like this," one of the officers was saying, his face flushed with anger. "The ghost is becoming more than just a nuisance. She's a symbol," another officer interrupted, his tone scornful. "A symbol of what? Defiance? Hope? That's a fool's dream. We have the strength and the numbers. This so-called ghost is nothing but a phantom." Atsu's lips curled into a thin smile as she stepped forward, her blade at the ready. "A phantom, you say?" The officers turned as one, their eyes widening in shock. Before they could react, Atsu moved, her sword a blur of motion. Blood sprayed, and screams echoed through the hall. The officers scrambled for their weapons, but Atsu was relentless, cutting them down one by one. The last man fell, clutching his chest, his eyes filled with terror. "Please have mercy," he gasped, his breath hitching. Atsu knelt beside him, her gaze cold and unyielding. "Mercy?" she whispered, her voice soft and deadly. "Did you show mercy to the people you slaughtered? To the villages you razed?" The man's eyes darted around wildly, as if searching for some escape. But there was none. Atsu's blade descended, and his life ended in a gurgle of blood. Standing amidst the carnage, Atsu glanced at the maps strewn across the table. They detailed Shoujo's plans, his next targets, his supply routes, the positions of his forces. Atsu committed each detail to memory, her resolve hardening. With one swift movement, she slashed a message into the wooden table. "The ghost watches." She turned, the hall now silent save for the crackling of torches. The ghost of Mount Yōtei had struck once more, leaving a trail of blood and fear in her wake. But this was only the beginning. Shoujo's war would not end with a single skirmish or a few dead officers. It would be a long, brutal struggle. Atsu stepped out into the night, the cold air biting at her skin. Somewhere, in the darkness, Shoujo's men would find her message. And they would know the ghost was real. And she would not stop until the land of Ezo was free. The fortress burned like a beacon in the distance, its flames licking the night sky with a malevolent glow. The once quiet pine forest surrounding it roared with chaos and destruction, the shouts of panicked men and the clanging of steel reverberating through the trees. Atsu watched from her vantage point on a rocky outcrop, the orange and red flickers dancing in her dark eyes. She had delivered a warning, and Shoujo's men had received it. But vengeance demanded more than warnings. She turned her back to the burning fortress and made her way down the slope, disappearing into the shadows of the forest. The path ahead was clear now. She would continue dismantling Shoujo's power, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but ash. Tonight's raid had been the first step, severing the head of the snake. But to crush the warlord's spirit, she needed to take more from him than mere lives. She needed to strike at his pride. Atsu's destination lay deeper into the wilderness, far from the chaos of the burning fortress. It was a place she had only recently learned about, a hidden camp nestled in a secluded valley, where Shoujo's most trusted officer, a man known only as Koga the Wolf, commanded a force of elite warriors. The camp served as a staging ground for Shoujo's most ambitious campaigns, and eliminating it would cripple his ability to launch large-scale attacks. The journey was long and grueling, the terrain growing rougher and more treacherous with every step. Snow-covered trails twisted through dense clusters of pine, the ground beneath her feet uneven and slick with ice. The air was crisp and cold, and Atsu pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders, her breath misting before her. As she pressed on, her thoughts turned to Koga. Unlike the warlord Shoujo, who ruled through fear and brute force, Koga was a master strategist, a man of honor and discipline, renowned for his loyalty and the deadly efficiency of his troops. He had earned his moniker, the Wolf, for his cunning and ruthless nature on the battlefield. To face him would be to face one of Shoujo's greatest assets. Yet Atsu welcomed the challenge. It was men like Koga who served as the foundation for tyrants like Shoujo, men who enforced their will and made their oppression possible. If she could break Koga, it would send a message that Shoujo's empire was built on a foundation of sand, and it would crumble beneath the weight of the ghost's resolve. Hours passed, the moon climbing higher into the sky as Atsu moved deeper into the wilderness. Finally, she reached the edge of the valley where Koga's camp lay hidden. From her vantage point atop a rocky ledge, she peered down at the scene below. The camp was larger than she had expected. Rows of tents spread out across the valley floor, their white canvas blending almost seamlessly with the snow. A large bonfire crackled in the center, casting flickering shadows over the camp. Warriors moved about, their silhouettes dark and foreboding. Some carried weapons, their armor gleaming under the moonlight, while others tended to the horses tethered at the far end of the camp. Atsu's gaze settled on the largest tent at the camp's center, adorned with the emblem of a snarling wolf. It was there that she would find Koga, no doubt surrounded by his most trusted men. But getting to him would be no simple task. The camp was well guarded, and the men stationed there were not ordinary foot soldiers. These were Shoujo's elite, hardened veterans who had proven themselves in countless battles. But Atsu was no ordinary warrior either. She was the ghost, and she would make them fear her. With silent determination, she descended the ledge and crept through the underbrush, her movements as smooth and silent as the wind. She approached the camp's perimeter, where a pair of guards stood watch, their eyes scanning the darkness. Atsu waited, her hand resting lightly on the hilt of her tanto. Timing was everything. One of the guards shifted, turning his back to her as he rubbed his hands together for warmth. In that split second, Atsu moved. She slipped out from the shadows, her blade flashing in the moonlight. The first guard fell without a sound, his throat slit cleanly. The second barely had time to draw breath before Atsu's katana sliced through the air, severing his windpipe. She caught the body before it could hit the ground and dragged it into the shadows. The camp was none the wiser. Atsu crouched low, her senses heightened, and she listened carefully. No alarms had been raised. Good. The element of surprise was still on her side. She weaved her way through the camp, keeping to the shadows cast by the tents and the flickering bonfire. The voices of the men reached her ears, gruff laughter, muttered conversations, the clatter of armor and weapons. They were confident, secure in their strength and numbers. They did not yet know that death had come for them. Atsu paused near a smaller tent, where two men were talking in low voices. Their words drifted to her, carried by the wind. "Have you heard? The fortress to the west was attacked," one of them whispered, his tone uneasy. "They say the ghost struck again. Wiped out the whole command." The other man scoffed, though his voice lacked conviction. "TCH. I'll believe it when I see it. A lone warrior can't take down a fortress. Probably just a fire, or a raid by the local rebels." "Maybe," the first man replied, his voice dropping even lower. "But if it's true, if it was the ghost then..." The man's words were cut off as Atsu's blade sliced through the tent's fabric, and then through his throat. He fell, a look of shock etched on his face. The second man scrambled back, reaching for his sword, but Atsu was faster. She drove her tanto into his chest, twisting the blade as he gasped and choked. Blood stained the snow, steaming in the cold night air. A sudden shout rang out from the other side of the camp, followed by the clash of steel. Atsu's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. The camp was stirring, men rushing to grab their weapons and form ranks. Somehow, her presence had been discovered. "So be it," she murmured, rising to her feet and drawing her katana. The blade glinted in the firelight, its edge sharp and unforgiving. "Come, then. Face the ghost." A dozen men converged on her position, their faces grim and determined. They moved with precision, their swords and spears held at the ready. Atsu exhaled slowly, centering herself. The air felt electric, charged with the tension of an impending storm. The warriors closed in, a wall of steel and muscle, but Atsu stood her ground, her grip firm and unwavering. The first man lunged, his spear thrusting forward with deadly intent. Atsu sidestepped smoothly, her movements a blur of speed and grace. Her katana flashed, severing the spear's shaft before arcing upward to slash across the man's chest. He stumbled back, blood spraying from the deep gash, and crumpled to the ground. Two more men attacked in unison, their swords swinging in wide arcs meant to overwhelm her. Atsu dropped low, her knees bending as she spun, her blade sweeping out to catch one man's ankle. He cried out, collapsing as she surged upward, bringing her katana down in a brutal overhead strike that cleaved through his shoulder. The second man hesitated, his eyes widening as he saw his comrade fall. That hesitation cost him dearly. Atsu's tanto shot out from beneath her cloak, the blade burying itself in his throat with a sickening crunch. He staggered back, clutching at the wound as blood gushed through his fingers and collapsed in a lifeless heap. A roar of fury erupted from the remaining warriors as they pressed the attack. They were well trained, disciplined, and fought as a cohesive unit, each strike and thrust designed to create openings for the others. But Atsu was the ghost, and she moved like a spirit of vengeance, weaving between their blades with an effortless fluidity that defied comprehension. One man swung his sword at her head, but she ducked under the blow, her katana slashing across his midsection. He screamed, his hands going to his belly as his innards spilled out in a grisly mess. Another man tried to skewer her with a spear, but she sidestepped and spun, slicing through his exposed side. The remaining warriors hesitated, their resolve wavering. They had heard stories of the ghost, of her speed, her skill, and her ruthlessness. But to face her in person, to see their comrades fall like autumn leaves before her blade, was something else entirely. Fear flickered in their eyes, and in that instant, Atsu knew she had already won. She took a step forward, her gaze like a blade itself, cutting through the night. "Is this all that Shoujo's best have to offer?" she taunted, her voice low and cold. "Come then. Face me if you dare. Let's see who has the courage to challenge death itself." The men glanced at one another, their grips on their weapons faltering. But before they could decide whether to flee or fight, a commanding voice rang out from behind them. "Enough!" The warriors parted, stepping aside as a tall figure strode forward. Atsu's gaze narrowed as she took in the sight of the man who now stood before her. He was broad-shouldered and imposing, his armor adorned with the emblem of a snarling wolf. His eyes, a piercing amber, locked onto hers with a cold, calculating intensity. "Koga the wolf," she murmured, recognizing him instantly. His reputation had preceded him. Stories of his brutality and brilliance on the battlefield had reached her ears long before she set foot in Ezo. This was the man who served as Shoujo's right hand, who commanded the warlord's elite forces with an iron fist. The warriors stepped back, giving their commander a wide berth. Koga's gaze swept over the bodies of his fallen men, then returned to Atsu. He did not speak at first, simply regarding her with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. "So," he said at last, his voice deep and steady, "you are the ghost. I had heard whispers of your deeds, but I did not believe them. Not until now." Atsu remained silent, her stance poised and ready. Koga's presence radiated power and danger. He was no mere officer, but a warrior of exceptional skill. Every line of his body, every movement he made, was a testament to his training and experience. "You've caused quite a stir," Koga continued, his gaze never leaving hers. "Attacking our fortresses, killing our men. But you've made a grave mistake coming here alone." He drew his sword, the blade gleaming ominously in the firelight. "Now you face the wolf, and I will see that your legend ends tonight." Without another word, Koga lunged, his sword slicing through the air with blinding speed. Atsu's katana met his blade with a resounding clang, the force of the impact reverberating up her arm. Koga pressed forward, his strength and skill evident in every strike. He was relentless, each blow perfectly timed, each movement precise. But Atsu was no stranger to fighting against overwhelming odds. She parried his strikes, her own blade darting out in quick, measured riposts. Their swords clashed again and again, sparks flying as steel met steel, Koga's attacks were powerful, but she was faster, her movements a blur as she evaded his crushing blows. They circled one another, their eyes locked in a deadly dance. Koga's expression was a mask of concentration, his breathing steady despite the intensity of the fight. Atsu could see why he had earned the respect and fear of so many. He was a warrior of the highest caliber, his every action purposeful and controlled. But Atsu had not survived this long by relying on skill alone. She fought with a ferocity born of pain and loss, of a burning need for justice. And she knew something Koga did not, something that gave her the edge. She saw it in his eyes, in the slight tightening of his jaw as their blades locked once more. Koga was confident, yes, but he was also wary. He had never faced an opponent like her before, an opponent who fought like a ghost, who slipped through his defenses like water through a clenched fist. With a sudden burst of speed, Atsu disengaged, feinting left before darting right. Her blades sliced through the air, aimed directly at Koga's exposed side. He twisted, bringing his sword up just in time to block the strike, but Atsu had anticipated the move. She pivoted, her tanto flashing in her other hand as she drove it towards his chest. Koga barely managed to evade, the blade grazing his armor. He stumbled back, his eyes widening in surprise. Atsu didn't give him time to recover. She pressed the attack, her swords moving in tandem, a whirlwind of steel and death. Koga's defenses wavered under the onslaught, and she saw her opening. With a fierce cry, she swept his blade aside and brought her katana down in a powerful strike. Koga's sword arm buckled, his grip faltering. Blood sprayed as her blade bit deep into his shoulder, and he staggered back, his face contorted in pain. Atsu stepped back, her breathing heavy but controlled. Koga clutched his wounded shoulder, blood seeping through his fingers. He looked at her with a mixture of rage and grudging respect. "Impressive," he growled, his voice strained. "But this isn't over." With a fierce glare, Koga barked out a command, and suddenly the ground beneath Atsu's feet trembled. She glanced around, realizing too late that she was surrounded. From the shadows, more of Koga's warriors emerged, weapons drawn and ready. "Your legend ends tonight, Ghost," Koga rasped, straightening despite his wound. "Kill her!" But Atsu did not falter. Raising her sword, she turned to face the encroaching warriors, a cold determination blazing in her eyes. "If tonight is my end, then I will take as many of you with me as I can," she murmured, her voice like a blade cutting through the night. And with that, she charged. Atsu's charge was a blur of motion and steel. She leapt into the fray with the precision and ferocity of a hunting hawk, her katana and tanto dancing in a deadly duet. The first warrior who stepped forward met a swift end as her katana split his chest, the blade carving through armor and bone with ease. Before the man could even cry out, she was already upon the next, her tanto plunging into his exposed throat. The others hesitated, the sight of their comrades falling in rapid succession freezing them in place. But Koga's voice roared over the din, snapping them out of their stupor. "Surround her! Don't let her escape!" They moved as one, a wall of armored bodies closing in around her. Spears jabbed from every direction, swords arced through the air, but Atsu danced between them, her movements impossibly fluid. She deflected a spear thrust with her katana, her tanto flicking out to slice through the spear's haft. The wielder reeled back, clutching at the broken weapon, and Atsu's katana struck again, a flash of silver that ended his life. But there were too many, their sheer numbers pressing in like a tide. Atsu ducked and twisted, parried and countered, but a spear grazed her side, its point tearing through the fabric of her cloak. Pain flared as blood seeped through the wound, warm against the chill of the night. She hissed, but her resolve only hardened. "Fight, you cowards!" Koga barked, his voice laced with fury and desperation. "Overwhelm her! Use your weight! Pin her down!" The men surged forward, their weapons stabbing and slashing from all sides. Atsu spun, parrying a sword strike and lashing out with her tanto. The blade caught one warrior across the face, a crimson line blooming where it cut. He fell back with a strangled scream, but his place was immediately taken by another. For every man Atsu cut down, two more seemed to take his place. Her breath came faster now, her movements growing heavier. Blood dripped from several shallow wounds on her arms and legs, and she could feel her strength ebbing. Yet she fought on, a tempest of steel and defiance. A spear jabbed at her from the right, and she twisted to avoid it, only to feel a blade slice across her back. She staggered, pain flaring like fire, but she gritted her teeth and slashed out, her katana finding purchase in a man's side. He crumpled, but she barely had time to recover before another warrior closed in, swinging a massive club at her head. Atsu ducked under the blow, her legs burning with exertion. She parried a sword strike, but the force of the impact sent her stumbling back. She could feel it, the exhaustion creeping into her limbs, the slow drain of energy as the battle wore on. These were no ordinary soldiers. They fought with the discipline and resolve of men who had faced death countless times before. Koga watched from a distance, his wounded shoulder wrapped in a makeshift bandage. His gaze was sharp, calculating, even as he struggled to hide the pain etched on his face. He knew Atsu was wearing down. He could see it in the slight falter of her steps, the subtle hesitation in her strikes. "Keep pressing," he shouted. "Don't let her rest. She's tiring." The warriors roared in response, their attacks growing bolder. They lunged at her with renewed ferocity, their weapons striking from every angle. Atsu deflected a sword swing, but a spear jabbed at her side, the point driving deep into her flesh. She gasped, a pained cry escaping her lips, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. With a desperate surge of energy, she twisted around, severing the spear's shaft with a powerful slash of her katana. The man holding it fell back, but another stepped forward, his blade descending toward her head. Atsu raised her tanto to block, the impact reverberating up her arm, and lashed out with her katana. The warrior fell, clutching his torn throat, but more closed in around her. Atsu's breath came in ragged gasps, her vision blurring. She was bleeding from too many wounds, her limbs trembling from exertion. Still, she fought on, refusing to yield, refusing to fall. And then, in the midst of the chaos, she heard it, a low, mournful howl that seemed to resonate through the valley. The sound cut through the din of battle, silencing the shouts and screams. Atsu's eyes widened, and the warriors around her froze, their heads snapping up in unison. The howl came again, louder this time, and the ground seemed to tremble beneath their feet. Atsu glanced around, her gaze darting toward the shadows at the edge of the camp. And then she saw them, dark shapes emerging from the trees, their eyes glowing in the firelight. Wolves. Atsu's heart skipped a beat. The wolves moved silently, their sleek forms gliding through the snow with a predatory grace. They were massive, their fur thick and bristling, and their eyes were like twin embers, burning with an unnatural intensity. They did not look like ordinary wolves. There was something almost otherworldly about them, a primal force that made the hair on the back of Atsu's neck stand on end. The warriors shifted nervously, their weapons wavering. One man took a step back, his face pale with fear. What are those?" Koga's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. "Hold your ground," he barked. "They're just animals. Kill them if they get too close." But the wolves did not attack. They merely watched, their eyes fixed on the scene before them. Atsu felt a strange, inexplicable connection to the creatures, as if they understood her struggle, her pain. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, the tension thick and palpable. Then, without warning, the largest of the wolves, a massive, silver-furred beast with a scar running down its muzzle, lifted its head and howled again. The sound echoed through the valley, a haunting, ethereal cry that seemed to reverberate deep within Atsu's soul. Something shifted in the air, a change so subtle and profound that Atsu felt it like a physical force. The warriors glanced at each other, uncertainty etched on their faces. And then, one by one, the wolves turned and began to move away, slipping back into the shadows from whence they came. "What?" Koga's voice was a low growl, frustration and confusion warring in his gaze. "What are they doing?" But Atsu knew. Somehow she knew. The wolves were not abandoning her. They were granting her a reprieve, a chance to end this on her terms. A chance to face Koga alone, without the interference of his men. She took a deep, steadying breath, and stepped forward. The warriors parted instinctively, their eyes wide and uncertain. Blood dripped from her wounds, staining the snow at her feet, but she held her katana high, her gaze locked on Koga. "This ends now, Koga," she said softly, her voice carrying through the night like a whisper of death. "You and I. No more men. No more bloodshed. Just us." Koga's eyes blazed with fury, but he did not refuse her challenge. With a sharp nod, he gestured to his men. "Stand down," he ordered. "This fight is mine." The warriors hesitated, then stepped back, forming a wide circle around the two combatants. Koga turned to face Atsu, his sword raised, his stance steady. Despite his injuries, he exuded a formidable presence, the air around him thrumming with barely contained power. Atsu took another step forward, her gaze never leaving his. The pain in her body receded to a distant throb, her mind focused and clear. She tightened her grip on her katana, her heart steady. The final confrontation had come at last. And no matter the outcome, she would face it with all the strength and resolve of the ghost. The moon hung high in the sky, casting an ethereal glow over the battlefield. The clearing was silent except for the soft crunch of snow beneath their feet, the world holding its breath in anticipation of the clash to come. Atsu and Koga stood facing each other, the tension crackling in the air like a coiled serpent ready to strike. "Are you prepared to die?" Koga taunted, a cruel smile twisting his lips as he raised his sword. "You may have evaded my men, but against me, You will find no escape." Atsu's heart raced, but she refused to let fear take root. "I fear no man," she replied, her voice steady and clear, cutting through the cold night. "And I do not seek death. I seek justice, for those who have suffered at your hands, for the blood you've spilled." Koga's expression darkened, the amusement fading as he stepped forward, his sword gleaming ominously in the moonlight. "Justice? You speak of justice, yet you bring death wherever you go. You are nothing more than a phantom, a ghost haunting the shadows." With a fierce roar, he lunged at her, his sword slashing through the air. Atsu sidestepped, the blade whistling past her ear, and countered with a swift strike of her katana. Their swords clashed, the sound ringing like a bell through the quiet night. Atsu pressed the attack, her movements swift and agile. She danced around Koga, her blades slicing through the air with lethal precision. But he was relentless, his strikes powerful and calculated, forcing her to remain on the defensive. Each blow he delivered was a test of her endurance, each clash a reminder of the stakes at hand. Atsu could feel the exhaustion creeping back into her limbs, the toll of their earlier fight weighing heavily on her. But she fought with a ferocity born of purpose, each swing of her blade a testament to the lives she sought to protect. They circled each other, Koga striking with brutal efficiency, his sword a deadly extension of his will. Atsu barely managed to evade his blows, each narrow escape heightening her focus. She was aware of every muscle in her body, every breath she took, and she honed her instincts to a fine edge. With a feint, Koga drew her in, then spun low, attempting to sweep her legs from under her. Atsu jumped, narrowly avoiding the strike, but Koga was already on his feet, lunging again, his blade aimed straight for her heart. "Your strength will not save you," he growled, pushing forward, each swing growing more powerful and aggressive. But Atsu saw an opening. His shoulder was exposed, a brief moment of vulnerability in his relentless assault. Summoning every ounce of strength left within her, she shifted her weight, her katana aimed at his side. In that instant, the world around them faded, leaving only the clash of their wills. With a quick thrust, she struck, her blade finding its mark, plunging deep into Koga's side. His eyes widened in shock, the fire within them dimming as he staggered back, clutching his wound. "You!" he gasped, disbelief mingling with pain. "You've defeated me!" Atsu stepped back, breathless and trembling, the gravity of the moment weighing heavily upon her. She could see the light fading from his eyes, the warrior spirit extinguishing. "Let this be a lesson," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Justice does not forget, and neither will I." Koga fell to his knees, the snow beneath him soaking up the crimson that poured from his wound. Atsu watched as he collapsed forward, the weight of his actions finally crashing down upon him. The clearing was silent once more, the moon casting a ghostly light over the fallen warrior. As the realization of victory settled over Atsu, she felt a wave of weariness wash over her, the adrenaline fading to leave behind an aching emptiness. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. With Koga defeated, she knew there were still others who would seek to claim power through bloodshed. Her heart ached for the families torn apart by violence, for the lives lost in pursuit of ambition. With resolve hardening within her, Atsu turned away from the fallen warrior, her gaze drifting toward the towering silhouette of Mount Yōtei. It loomed in the distance, a reminder of the strength and resilience that had guided her through this dark journey. "I will continue to fight," she vowed to the night, her voice a solemn promise carried away by the wind. "As long as there is injustice, I will be the ghost that haunts the darkness." And with that, she melted into the shadows, the spirit of the ghost guiding her forward into the uncertain night, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead.